Great. So we have what I will make an interesting panel. Governments and Web 3.0 adoption. Again, I'm Gordon Einstein. I'll be the moderator. I'd like to welcome onto the stage Mohammed Seer. I'll have everyone introduce themselves a little bit more when they get on stage. Mohammed, please come to the stage. Michelle Chavunga and Gabriel Abed. Please give a big round of applause for my co-panelists. And can I have a microphone also? It's okay. To you. And Gabriel, are you here? Or Gabriel? Gabriel.
He's around.
He'll join us. Okay, very good. Come on up. Round of applause for all of us.
There's always one, isn't there?
Hello. Good to see you. How are you? Good to see you. See you. You know, I like standing when I moderate, so I'm just going to do it if you guys don't mind. Let's welcome all to our lovely panelists. Why don't we go one by one? I like to say that every superhero has an origin story or an origin tale. So please say who you are, what you're working on right now, but also give us a little bit of background on yourselves and explain your Web 3.0 crypto blockchain pedigree so that we know what perspective you're coming from. So please, we'll just start here and we'll go down.
Great, okay. So my name is Mohammed Seer. I have been passionate about how technology can change the way governments serve and interact with citizens. And I started my career within the UK civil service as a career civil servant. After about 12 years of working there, I moved into the private sector, worked a lot with interesting startups, many in the TMT sector, and then I joined one of the big professional services firm, Ernst & Young, EY in the region. I used to be a client of theirs, became then on the other side of the table. That's been now about 8 years. And in the MENA region, I drive the digital government agenda for EY and work with many governments around answering these big questions of how they can use the digital world technologies and business models to better serve and work with different stakeholder groups. So I'm passionate about making a difference in people's lives. So that's why when we talk about Web 3.0, and particularly we talk about metaverse, I see some very interesting dimensions over there about what government could be doing to use this technology to better engage and serve.
Very interesting. Michelle, please.
Hi, afternoon everybody. My name is Michelle Chavunga and I'm the CEO of Global Policy House. Global Policy House is a cross between, I would say, a fintech and an investment company based in London, but we focus quite heavily around emerging markets, especially Africa. We're really focused on trying to support the adoption of blockchain across the continent. When I say the continent, I mean obviously in Africa, but we do work across other emerging markets as well. We're very, very passionate about impact-led projects and of course, around sustainability and sustainable impact investments. But we also, in the blockchain space, we're really, really keen to work with, we have been working with governments across Africa. And their main ambition with governments across Africa is really to establish what does not just blockchain, but what does the digital economy have to offer the continent, and also looking at regulation and, regulatory structures for the African continent. That's like about 55 African countries, just to be specific. We have quite a few. And then, of course, we're also very, very passionate about supporting the industry, the blockchain industry and growth within the industry, especially around talent and around women and supporting more and more women to come into this space. We just came from Kenya where we held our summit on digital assets, the first digital asset summit across the continent. And one of the ambitions, with that was actually to drive more interest, especially from women-led businesses to engage within the digital trade and digital economy space. And we launched our 10 Million Women initiative, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. So we are passionate about transforming people's lives using technology. For us, we see blockchain and other technologies as tools that can help us to achieve certain things, especially sustainability and helping to transform people's lives. But there's a number of other areas that we're also passionate about, which I'll leave until later on, and I'll let my colleague.
Sorry,
Gabriel.
just one sec. Do me a favor, guys, start the clock, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to know how much time we have left on the panel. AV people? Olga, maybe you want to wake them up? Guys, start the clock so I know how much time we have left on the panel.
We have all the time in the world.
Yes? Or we can just talk all day, I don't mind. Okay, Gabriel.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gabriel Abed, and I'm the ambassador of Barbados to the United Arab Emirates. But prior to becoming ambassador, I had a deep and extensive history with Bitcoin and blockchain technology, specifically ranging from being one of the first companies in Latin America to launch a blockchain-based product, pioneering central bank digital currencies, and participating as a co-founder and GP in the hedge fund world in the very early days. More recently, our embassy and country has been embarking on pioneering new areas of governance, and specifically in the field of diplomacy, Barbados is embarking on building a metaverse embassy, along with looking at very diverse and unique opportunities of where government and technology can take a foothold.
Very interesting. And I've seen you speak at a lot of these conferences, and you're very passionate about this topic, so it's appreciated. So, Mohammed, let me come right back to you, since you have this is one of your main areas. How is this even a thing? Can you explain or dive into a little bit more the intersection between digital services and government, and specifically, what is the concept of Web 3.0 add that the word digital itself doesn't add? Like, what is the next layer of what we're going to? And please.
Different ways to look at answering the same question, but I prefer to look at we are living in a digital age rather than digital as a specific topic. In the digital age, we have many different things that are happening. There is an evolution of business models that didn't exist before. We are starting to explore those business models, whether we talk about the gig economy, the crowdsourcing economy, all of these new kind of shared economy. These are business models which didn't necessarily exist before, and in the digital age that we're living in, have starting to emerge. And it's an opportunity for us, whether we are a government or a private sector organization, to explore how these new business models could be adopted in some shape or form. The other side of it, then you have obviously many different technologies that have emerged and are emerging within this digital age we're living in. Blockchain obviously is one of them, AI is another one of them. Now we're talking about Web 3.0, which is moving obviously towards a different way of how to manage the way we've been doing things online. And Metaverse is another element within that mix, and there are many more. All of these, when we think of them as technologies that are emerging or have emerged that can be used, and we think of it from a use case perspective, we start to see much more benefit being driven from this. As governments, there are generally three things they're dealing with. Number one, how do we enable these new emerging technologies that are coming, how we enable those economies to grow. So they play an enabler role, creating the opportunities or giving the policies that will allow for that to happen. If you look at what Dubai has done in terms of metaverse, talking about very boldly that they want to create X impact on the economy of Dubai, and from that they are starting to think about the supply side, which is the people, how to build the capabilities, and also they're looking at the demand side, how they as a government can create demand for use of these technologies. So that's one thing governments are doing or can do. The second part of it is they are trying to figure out how do we regulate these things. Because again, free for all can be, you need that freedom for exploration, for people to grow and build new ideas and concepts and new startups to emerge. But at the same time, there are some elements you want to try and protect. Consumer protection is a big one of them. So how do you regulate? How do you put the right kind of policies in place that are not too stringent, but at the same time, they are going to create protection where protection is needed? And we're seeing many government started to embrace on the regulatory sandbox concept where they're allowing for exploration to take place. And the third part of you can say the role that they are looking to play or are playing is where they become consumers themselves of these technologies. So creating the demand side of it. So one, if you think about it, is more becoming an enabler. On the enablement side is also the infrastructure that is needed. You know, if you don't have connectivity that is at a certain pace, certain technologies can't be used, especially when we go into VR and XR and those areas. And then obviously the third one being the demand side, which is how can I start to embrace and create opportunities for both startups, but also others to explore and work with governments to create potential use cases. And in this particular region, in the MENA region, as you probably will be aware, a lot of the economies are run directly by government. So if you think about healthcare, there is private sector participation, but government sector role is quite large in they're running many of the hospitals and the infrastructure. If you think of education, the same. You think of transportation is the same. So they become quite a big demand side player, whilst they enable as well on the education and infrastructure side.
Let me stay with you for one more minute, and then we'll go down. You're speaking, and you kind of brought an aspect to it that I hadn't considered before. Like Dubai has, I'm new here, but this place seems to have a philosophy of build it and they will come. You know, build something entertaining, build something easy, build something welcoming, and people will show up. And I think recently, especially during the time of COVID, that's, and you know, with their support of crypto and blockchain, that's proven to be true. Does that hold in this sort of virtual 3.0 world? Is that analogous, or does that model somehow not directly apply?
No, I think it does apply, and any government which is going to be forward-thinking and is going to be open to explore and experiment is generally going to be the leader in this space. Dubai has recently started in the journey of the metaverse and looking at how to use it. South Korea is another country to keep in mind because they actually started way ahead of anyone else. And if you think of what they're going to achieve, and they have a 3-year roadmap, they're looking at both the supply side and trying to build supply talent. And they're also looking at creating the demand, so themselves starting to explore and experiment stuff. This year, for example, the mayor's office, if I remember correctly, in Seoul will go in the metaverse, and physical and virtually will exist. They will also do the lanterns show that happens every year, both in the metaverse and in the physical world as well. So there are countries which are stretching this. Norway is another one, which is the government is exploring some very interesting new concepts around the metaverse on how to serve. I mean, when we talk in most of the use cases later on, I can give some examples of how I personally see the exploration of this space by governments in the future.
Great, and I appreciate the extended comments. It's interesting. Michelle? Oh, sorry, yes, Michelle, please.
Yes.
Have at it.
You wanted me to comment on the same?
Feel free to reflect on what's just spoken about, but I'm also trying to nail down, I mean, the digitization of government has happened for a long time. It's sort of been destroyed for a few decades now. But there's something new, I suppose, with Web 3.0 and the metaverse beyond the basic digitizations of processes, beyond making things web accessible. With, Estonia is all e-government, but I don't think people say, that's not necessarily the same thing as Web 3.0. So I'm wondering if you can tease this out a little bit and just give us your thoughts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And definitely agree with what Mohammed was saying. I think one of the things that we're seeing with governments around the world is really how they're starting to embrace digital tools really to help them as well as a government. So this is really very much them leveraging off what's happening, I think, within Web3 to say, actually, how can we improve our processes and our systems within, as government, number one. Certainly from the African side, when we had COVID, we've seen a lot of countries, actually governments, starting to actually turn to digital for simple things, like getting access to credit and finance and sending, finance and credit through mobile phones and mobile numbers and things like that was quite prominent. So the whole era around digitalization as a whole has evolved over time, like you were saying. I think the beauty with Web3 and what we're going to see with Web3 is actually a more faster and faster engagement and also cross-engagement, what I call cross-engagement, where you have governments from around the world actually interacting with one another in ways that we never would have imagined. So if you start to think about even the metaverse and having governments onto the metaverse and them engaging with their customers, for me, their customers are their people. So governments really exist to serve their people. And sometimes government maybe kind of forget that. So it's very interesting, especially in this new world of data-driven environment, where government does hold a lot of data, right, number one, and how they can start to actually leverage Web3 to also manage data is also quite exciting, I think, for many governments, and certainly from the African perspective, where there's still, heavy paper-based systems, for example. We are starting to explore how things like the metaverse, how things like big data, is going to play a big part in terms of managing data, artificial intelligence, and how you can use AI to actually read data sets, right? And organizing data and information is actually quite relevant. It's also very, very interesting because when you start to look at what happened with COVID, right, a lot of countries were also not prepared for things like COVID. Even in terms of like the medical records that we have, land titles that we have in places like Africa, where you want to start to manage those a little bit more effectively. Again, we're starting to leverage, Web3. So for me, Web3 is an opportunity to actually do digital transformation. And what is backing Web3? Web3 is also backed by a strong blockchain infrastructure, if you like to think of it like that, and it provides more and more opportunity, I think, for governments to become innovative, but for governments to also deliver digital transformation. You cannot deliver, I think, in the future, economic transformation if you don't tap on digital transformation. So we have to understand the differences between the two. And I think Web3 is an underlining foundation in order for us to actually deliver and do that. And we're starting to see that across different countries. And this is not just in Africa. I mean, we're doing some stuff, of course, also in Bermuda and places like that as well, and how Bermuda is engaging with looking at new digital assets and, how to manage and regulate digital assets is another area. So, there's different ways I think governments are starting to think about how they engage, but there's also new ways I think with Web3 and with blockchain that even things like central banks are starting to think in a very different way. So again, they're excited about looking at things like programmable money, what we call programmable money through things like digital currency. And central banks are also quite excited and wondering, okay, how can we play around with the technology? What does Web3 offer us? And how can we also become innovative, right? Of course, there are many issues that we need to discuss around things like privacy, managing data, who controls the data, who owns the data. And we're going to see a lot of transition around that. But I think Web3 presents a massive opportunity to actually innovate.
I think I heard you made an interesting link between Web 3.0 and central bank digital currencies.
Sorry, yes.
Not quite sure I've heard that before. That's interesting. Gabriel, please.
I think, Gordon, you said it earlier in the best way possible. Build it and they will come. And we're starting to see that. This market was led initially by the retail consumer wanting to build a better product for themselves and for each other. Eventually, institutions started to adopt it. And then we saw the likes of governments heading in this direction. And the reality of it is what Web3 really represents. It's not just the ability for a user to have a level of control over their own data, whether that data be aligned to a right of access or the ability to have a control of a certain asset class. But it also says to governments, this is allowing users to have a level of dictation within the networks that they participate in. And therefore, governments are realizing that this becomes a mechanism for an effective and efficient governance system of what people are looking for to survive within a society. So they're turning towards these solutions with the mindset of providing users the ability to participate within that network, be it government or open, and the ability to control and have a level of say within that network as well. And one of the things that I'm noticing is governments are moving away from the permissioned environments and moving towards the permissionless environments, specifically after they have started to work in the permission world, because they're realizing the speed of updates, the speed of maintenance, the general level of resources required in the permission world are not as conducive to that of an open network. So that key important driver is allowing us to exist further and further in a decentralized nature. Combine that with the notion of Web3, which is just really a platform driven by a network which a user has a control of a data set over, it lends for a pretty interesting environment, one to which we can expect to see a liquid government within our lifetimes. And a liquid government means that every decision, process, asset managed by the government is now something that's autonomous and something that's directly interactive by the user. And we are entering that stage of where governments are starting to dabble in various industries, in various subsets and categories, whether it be a metaverse special economic zone, digital identity, central bank digital currencies, your health systems, and what have you. The key thing...
I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you. In my mind, central bank digital currencies, and this may be something you need to correct me about, to me that's almost the opposite of permissionless.
Depends on the central bank. Remember, not all central bank digital currencies are equal. This is an area where we pioneered from Barbados. We were the first to talk about CBDCs globally. So the holy grail, in my opinion, of a central bank digital currency is one that's akin to cash in your pocket, where the only role that the central bank played was the IOU and the validation of that system of saying, hey, if I give this to Michelle, she's going to accept it because of that level of trust and because of the anti-corruption proofing that's built into making sure you can't counterfeit the dollar. That has not been replicated in CBDC as yet. We're seeing permission systems, we're seeing M2 being replicated on CBDCs as a mechanism to prove that it could do as good of a job, but the reality is we've not seen a single central bank do M0, M1, which is coinage and notes in society. And that can be done on a permissionless system. It should be done on a permissionless system. And then you can get very into more granular details of various types of helicopter solutions for airdropping of money, various types of taxation solutions, depending on the spending habits of a person. And that's when Web3 really takes effect, because a person's profile is now captured in that data set, and autonomous programmable money can speak to that data set in a way that gives one user one level of access to the financial system, but another user a very different level of access. And we're heading towards that. Whether it's good or bad, we're heading in this direction.
I mean, I'm going to be a little bit snarky because I got to... When you talk about a permissionless peer-to-peer cash system that avoids counterfeit, that's not Bitcoin?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's many different types of monies, right? There's the money of the people, which is classified as a money that the people control, that's Bitcoin. There's money of the institutions or the private entity, the stable coins, USDC, USDT. And then there's money of the monetary authorities or the financial institutions, and that's fiat currency. And there's an ecosystem that is being built that supports all three and allows all three to function side by side. Just because fiat currency is centralized in its nature of issuance doesn't mean it needs to be centralized in its nature of settlement. And that's the part that central bankers haven't broken into yet. They still have that level of wanting control, as that is the mechanism and one of the main mandates of a central banker.
I mean, it's a topic for a different conference, but the idea of a permissionless CBDC is intriguing. But Michelle, I feel like you want to comment.
I think you and I had this discussion last time when we was in Malta
you and
or
I
something.
keep on revisiting the same topic.
Yes,
it's a good
no,
topic.
but seriously, I mean, what Gabriel is basically saying is, look, we have different, choice options, right? And I think that's actually quite important. In order to have a healthy financial ecosystem and a healthy financial economy, as we move forward, right, we have to have different options for people in different parts of the world. So if you go back again to emerging markets, because we've spent so much time in emerging markets, and it's not always easy, for example, to access Forex or currency. So the whole issue around digital currency comes into question, as in what role is it actually going to play in terms, when you're looking at things like financial inclusion and trying to make sure that people, from different segments of society are able to access what I call financial capital. So if you're not able to access financial capital because either you don't have access to, bank accounts and traditional, financing, what other choices and options do you have? So it's about choice, and it's also about the ability to be able to access these digital assets. For me, I class them as under digital assets. CBDC is a potential option, to look at maybe improving in certain countries, because there's so many other factors that you need to consider when it comes to digital currency, some of which Gabriel has outlined very well. But then when you look at different countries, different structures, or even economic development levels of some of these countries, as well as infrastructure and connectivity issues, there's a whole range of different issues that you have to think about. So CBDC is a quite complex issue to tackle, but I think what we're seeing with CBDC is, we have about 100 central banks across the world who are looking at digital currency, but I can tell you that most of those central banks haven't all gone and implemented or piloted what they're considering. So it's a very complex topic, and you have to really almost kind of look at it at national level and look at the different factors that come at national level. The important thing to actually take forward is that there's nothing wrong with having different options where you have the Bitcoins, you've got stable coins, you've got digital currency, but it's also important to understand the market in which we're talking about. So for me, it's important to have hybrid offering where you have the cash option and you also have other digital assets that people can access. And then you also have to think about technology. Technology is actually the easier part. So in terms of how you deploy these assets or how you deploy financial instruments, I spent 5 years designing financial instruments in London, in the heart of financial district. So for us, it's about how relevant are these materials, right? We call them financial instruments. How relevant are they for the society that you're dealing with? So it might be relevant for the UK because either you have an aging market or they have the infrastructure, they've got the system to actually keep, but it might not be relevant for a country like Zambia, my country, where you have a lot of the rural community who don't have connectivity, who cannot get to a bank account. So you have to contextualize when you're looking at some of these issues.
I throw something to the group, and then I'm going to start with you. Your focus is MENA. I remember from this conference and the last one, you have a high Africa focus. Obviously, Barbados. Is there something special about Web 3.0/metaverse, government, and the global South? Is it just coincidence in the fact we're in Dubai, or is there some unique motivators for if you're outside the U.S., if you're outside of Europe, that cause this to be more readily adopted or is pushing for its adoption? The answer could be no, or maybe there's something here.
No, I think this region in particular has more openness to exploring and experimenting. And I think also the governance structure is such that if there is a motivation, the decision making is a lot easier and they go and get on with it. And they explore it, experiment with it. Okay, it worked, didn't work, let's put it aside. Whereas if I look at UK, where my home country, then policy making takes a long time. Take a physical world stuff. I want to build an airport. I remember the debate for building Terminal 5, how many years it continued, eventually got built. In this part of the world, if they decide they want to build an airport, it's done. Let's move on with it and start building. So I think that difference in decision making and approaches is what enables this region more to experiment and explore. And second, I think that there is appetite and funding that comes behind it, which often we struggle within certain countries to find the conviction to put something behind it. There is a disruption. We're living in
I'm sorry, you're seeing that struggle where?
So if you think of Western Europe, for example,
okay.
Funding big projects or, innovative ideas can become a struggle sometimes. From the government side, I'm talking not the private sector. Whereas over here, you see a lot of intervention from governments in terms of funding, giving incentives, giving opportunities for those things to happen. So that's why you see more, I think, boldness towards exploring new technologies, new business models and ideas.
So if I heard you correctly, I just want to make sure I got it. You're saying in these, I don't even know what to call them anymore. It's not the developing world anymore. It's just this other place, depending on the other. But I think I'm hearing sort of a lack of mental restraints that are almost psychological, and the ability to direct that things get done efficiently once there's interest.
Yeah, and I would add ambition to that as well.
Ambition, yeah.
You know, because if you are ambitious about something, you want to do something, you want to create something new, you want to be on the map of the world, I think that also is driving a lot of the investment and change in this part of the world. Because for years it's been, of course, you know, our countries in the Western world are much more developed and been doing things in a different way for a long time. Here they've been under the shadows to some extent. So it's an opportunity for them to express themselves and show the world and put something on the map. Because most of the conversations, I can tell you this, and I kid you not, when we're talking about a particular investment, there's always about what is the social impact, how is it going to make a difference to my country. They would also talk about how does it, you know, change the fabric of the nation, the economy, etc. But then there's always a third, how will this change my perception in the world? Always
Yes.
they're thinking about that. You know, I want to create a perception.
I guess you're chomping at the bit to go.
I thought you're reaching out to Gabriel. No. I just wanted to kind of back what you're saying. I think, you know, there has to be the political will, number one, to actually get some of these things done. And what we're seeing in the UAE is actually a very clear vision and very clear leadership in terms of what, you know, needs to be achieved over time. I mean, we've seen the development, the levels of development that have happened here. We just finished a summit actually in Kenya a few days ago, and we actually had, you know, government leaders from the UAE actually presenting to us and talking about how it's important to set a vision. And how you should go about actually delivering on that vision. So, and having people buy into the vision. So it's not just about the government having a vision. You also have to bring your people along with you, you know, to deliver that vision. And we've seen that very, very clearly here in the UAE. Now, when it comes to places like Africa, again, you know, it's also a case of, like you were saying, around investments. Investments is very, very important. We spend a lot of time trying to source capital and finance to actually support these projects and programs. And if you don't have adequate investments and you don't have adequate financing to develop the big infrastructure and connectivity projects I was talking about, for example, for Africa, then even things like the whole, you know, sort of CBDCs and all that, you know, really are kind of coming secondary. So it's very important that when you're creating the right policy environment and regulatory environment for these things to actually happen in the first place, then you have to have the right levels of financing and investments to support the developments that you're actually anticipating. For us in Africa, that's 55 countries across the continent. We have a completely new policy shift. It's called the Continental Free Trade Area. With this new policy shift, basically, we're saying we're going to create completely different rules, you know, that are going to drive the growth within the 55 African countries. One country, which most of you are familiar with because it's second in terms of crypto adoption in the world, is Nigeria, right? So Nigeria is one African country, and Nigeria is predicted to have, I think, about 400 million people. So, you know, in the next couple of years, that's one country. We have 55 in Africa. So you can imagine in terms of complexity, right? There are 55 different nations. If we all decide in those countries that we're all going to create our own CBDCs, right? Digital currency, and those digital currencies don't somehow kind of interoperate, then we're missing the point that we have around the policy shift, which is we're trying to create one single African market. In order for us to do that and create that one single African market, we must have systems in place that are interoperable. So when we're talking about things like, you know, digital currency, we're talking about Bitcoin, we have to make sure that these systems or these instruments are able to be deployed across the 55 African nations, and we can have cross-border trade with the UAE, with the United States, with the UK. You know, these are important factors. So for us, even as a central bank, what you're thinking about is actually our core function is to ensure monetary policy, right? And strengthen, ensure financial stability. That's number one. It's not necessary to go and design new instruments because for the sake of designing digital currency. How well do they fit within the markets that we want to create? Are they going to service the people? Are they going to make a difference in terms of financial inclusion? Are they going to service women? Our economies in Africa are made up of 80% are SMEs and small businesses and entrepreneurs. So we care about that, and we want to make sure whatever is designed to be it, you know, whatever is Bitcoin or crypto or, you know, CBDC, how relevant is it in terms of actually addressing the needs of those communities that we're serving, which are SMEs.
Interesting. Gabriel, I'm going to be the last extended word. So just playing on the theme of what advantages or motivations are uniquely in the realm of Barbados or the Caribbean, What is this to you?
Well, it's not about what it is to me. It's about what it is to
I
developing
mean,
nations.
you as shorthand for your entire country.
And to go back on your original question was, why is blockchain taking adoption in areas outside of developed nations at a more rapid rate? And it usually boils down to A and B. A is some countries, specifically the developing ones, specifically small island developing states, are realizing that they can utilize said technology to leapfrog where they are within their existing service basis. So some countries are utilizing the actual technology, and that in of itself is giving them PR, coverage, media presence, etc. The B side of things are some countries are realizing that by enacting progressive regulation, by positioning themselves as a front runner, they're expecting and hoping to collect the traditional revenues of employment, foreign direct investment, talent creation on their shores, etc. Barbados is in it for the A and B. And we have seen a rise of many different countries over the last few years. We've seen Mauritius, we've seen Estonia, we've seen Bermuda. There's a whole host of them. And unfortunately for all, they just simply don't provide the ecosystem that Dubai was able to provide. Dubai was able to provide the investment, matched with the lifestyle, matched with the progressive leadership, matched with the adaptive regulation, matched with the competitive work environment. And you combine all of those ingredients together, and you have the recipe for the world's most leading hub for blockchain. As it relates to Barbados and the Caribbean, we do have an ambition to build the right type of environment, but first and foremost, we would like to utilize the technology to benefit our people and our governance.
I'm going to claim another minute, just because you peaked something right there. Just to be blunt, does Barbados look at Dubai as an example to be emulated? Is it an inspiration? Is it a fellow traveler?
Barbados does lend a lot of examples and look at the rest of the world and obviously take note and study the innovations that we see. But Barbados tries to be Barbados. And that's why we're the front runner in very unique and different things. And ultimately, innovation is something that the world hasn't seen before, and we try to introduce things that make sense for our people, whether it's being done in country A or country B. The reality is we look at what is needed for us and our people first and foremost.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much. All right, let's give a big round of applause, please, for a wonderful panel. I appreciate you all. Thank you. Well done.